The morning sun peeked through the tall windows of Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport, casting long shadows across the polished floor. Travelers hurried in every direction, rolling suitcases, checking phones, sipping coffee from paper cups. Among them walked a man in his early 40s, dressed simply in dark jeans, clean white sneakers, and a navy button-down shirt with the sleeves rolled up to his elbows. He carried no fancy briefcase, just a small black backpack slung over one shoulder. His expression was calm, focused, the kind of quiet confidence that comes from years of hard work and knowing exactly who you are, even if the world sometimes forgets to see it. He'd just come from inspecting a new hangar on the airport's south side, part of his routine checks as one of the co-owners of a regional airline. Not a massive global carrier, but a respected company that flew people to smaller cities across the Midwest and Southeast. He didn't wear his success like a badge. To most people passing by, he probably looked like any other business traveler. Maybe a project manager, maybe a teacher heading to a conference, and that was fine by him. He liked flying under the radar. At Gate B14, a line had formed for Flight 227 to Chicago. First-class passengers were being called. He checked his boarding pass, seat 1A, and stepped forward. The flight attendant, a woman with kind eyes and a name tag that read Lena, smiled as she scanned his ticket. "Good morning, sir. Window seat, first row. You'll have plenty of legroom." "Thanks," he said, nodding. "Appreciate it." He walked down the jet bridge and into the aircraft. The cabin was quiet, still filling up. He slipped into 1A, stowed his backpack in the overhead bin, and settled in by the window. Outside, ground crew moved with practiced efficiency, and the hum of the engines warming up filled the air. He leaned back, closed his eyes for a moment, and took a slow breath. Just another flight. Just another day. But not everyone saw it that way. A few minutes later, a woman in her late 60s approached the first-class section. She wore a crisp beige pantsuit, pearl earrings, and carried a designer handbag that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. Her silver hair was neatly styled and her posture was rigid, like she'd spent years standing in front of classrooms or boardrooms used to being obeyed. Her name wasn't important, but her attitude was about to become very important. She stopped short when she saw him in 1A. Her eyes narrowed. She glanced at her own boarding pass, then back at him. Without saying a word, she turned sharply and marched toward the front of the cabin where Lena was checking tickets. "That man," she said, voice low but sharp, "in 1A. There's been a mistake." Lena blinked. "Ma'am? He's in first class, but he doesn't look like he belongs here." Lena's polite smile didn't waver, but her eyes hardened slightly. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but I just scanned his ticket. He's confirmed in 1A. The woman scoffed. "Are you sure? Sometimes these systems glitch. Maybe he used someone else's pass, or maybe he just assumed he could sit here." Lena kept her voice even. "Ma'am, I assure you his ticket is valid. If you'd like to board, your seat is 1C. The woman hesitated, clearly unhappy. She glanced back at the man who was now reading a magazine, completely unaware of the conversation. She muttered something under her breath, just loud enough for the passengers nearby to catch a few words. "Entitled. Doesn't even dress the part. Lowering standards." She finally moved past Lena and into the cabin, her heels clicking sharply on the floor. She dropped into seat 1C with a huff, tossing her bag onto the empty middle seat as if claiming territory. She didn't look at her neighbor. She didn't say hello. She just sat there, arms crossed, radiating disapproval like a storm cloud. The man felt it, of course. You can't sit 2 feet away from someone radiating that kind of energy and not feel it. But he didn't react. He'd been here before, in boardrooms and restaurants and airports, where people looked at him and saw everything except who he really was. He'd learned long ago that rising to the bait only gave them more power. So he kept reading, kept breathing, kept his dignity intact. More passengers boarded. The cabin filled with the soft rustle of coats, the clink of ice in cups, the murmur of conversations. A couple in 2A chatted about their grandkids. A businessman in 3D typed furiously on his laptop. Life moved on, as it always does, but the tension in row 1 didn't fade. It thickened. When the plane pushed back from the gate and began taxiing, the woman finally turned her head, not to look out the window, not to check the safety card. She looked directly at him. "You know," she said, voice dripping with false sweetness, "some people think money buys them the right to act like they're better than everyone else." He lowered his magazine slowly. "I haven't said a word to you, ma'am." "That's not the point," she snapped, dropping the act. "It's the way you carry yourself, like you own the place." He met her gaze evenly. "I paid for my seat. Same as you." "Did you?" she challenged, raising an eyebrow. "Or did someone else pay for it? Maybe your employer?" He didn't flinch. "I work hard. I earn my place, just like anyone else." She let out a short, dismissive laugh. "Sure you do." The flight attendant came by with the drink cart. "Can I get you anything?" she asked the woman. "No," the woman said, then added pointedly, "and I certainly don't want anything that's been near him." Lena paused. Her professional mask slipped for just a second, a flicker of anger in her eyes, but she recovered quickly. "Of course, ma'am," she said coolly, moving on. The man didn't say anything, but inside, it stung. Not because of her words, those were just noise, but because of what they represented. A lifetime of being doubted, questioned, made to feel like an imposter in spaces he'd earned. He thought about his father, who'd worked double shifts at a factory just to put food on the table. He thought about the years he'd spent studying engineering at night while working days, the rejections, the doors slammed in his face, the times he'd been told, "You're not what we're looking for." And now here he was, co-owner of an airline, and still to some people he was just that man who didn't belong. The plane lifted off the runway, Atlanta shrinking below. Clouds drifted past the window. He stared out, not seeing them. He was thinking about whether to say something to defend himself, to explain who he was, but what would that prove? That he had money? That he had power? That wouldn't change her mind. People like her didn't see people. They saw stereotypes. And no amount of proof would rewrite a story they'd already decided was true. So he stayed quiet. But he didn't forget. As the flight leveled off, he pulled out his phone, not to scroll social media or check the news. He opened a secure messaging and typed a quick note to his assistant. Flight 227 to ORD. Passenger in 1C made multiple discriminatory remarks. Request full incident report and cabin footage. Handle per protocol. He hit send, then he put the phone away. He wasn't angry. Not really. More disappointed. Disappointed that in 2024, on a plane flying over the heart of America, someone could still look at another human being and see only the color of their skin, not their character, not their story, not their humanity. Around him, the cabin settled into the rhythm of mid-flight. People watched movies, dozed off, sipped coffee. The woman in 1C opened a book but didn't turn a single page. She kept glancing at him out of the corner of her eye as if waiting for him to do something suspicious, to steal a blanket, to talk too loudly, to prove her right. But he just sat there, calm, present, unshaken. Because he knew something she didn't. He knew that real power isn't about shouting or showing off. It's about quiet certainty. It's about knowing your worth so deeply that no one else's opinion can chip away at it. And he also knew something else, something that would change everything in just a few short hours. But for now he watched the clouds, listened to the steady drone of the engines, and waited. The woman kept her distance, her judgment hanging in the air like static. Other passengers sensed it too. A few gave him sympathetic glances. One young man in 2D even offered a small, supportive nod. He gave a slight nod back. No words were needed. Because sometimes, the most powerful response to hate isn't a fight. It's dignity. And he had plenty of that. The flight continued north, cutting through the sky, carrying with it not just passengers and luggage, but unspoken tensions, hidden truths, and the quiet promise that before this journey ended, everything would be revealed. And when it was, the woman who thought she knew who belonged and who didn't would learn the hardest lesson of all. That assumptions can be the most expensive kind of mistake. But that was still to come. For now, there was just the hum of the plane, the vast blue sky, and a man who refused to let anyone make him feel small even when they tried their hardest. The plane leveled off at cruising altitude, and the seatbelt sign clicked off with a soft chime. Outside, the sky stretched endlessly, bright blue, dotted with cotton-like clouds that looked close enough to touch. Inside, the cabin settled into that familiar rhythm of mid-flight life, the rustle of snack wrappers, the low hum of conversation, the occasional laugh from a movie playing on a screen. The man in 1A kept his eyes on the magazine in his lap, though he wasn't really reading. His mind was elsewhere, on the hangar inspection he'd just finished, on the quarterly safety review coming up next week, on the quiet pride he felt every time one of his planes took to the sky. Flying wasn't just business to him. It was legacy. His grandfather had worked as a baggage handler at this very airport, saving every spare dime to send his kids to college. Now, 2 generations later, he helped run an airline. That wasn't something he talked about often, but it was always there. Underneath everything, a quiet fire that kept him grounded, even when others tried to make him feel like he didn't belong. Across the aisle, the woman in 1C shifted in her seat. She'd been watching him since takeoff, her expression a mix of suspicion and irritation. She hadn't touched her complimentary sparkling water. She hadn't opened her book. She just sat there, arms crossed, as if guarding herself from something invisible, something she imagined he represented. When the flight attendant came by with the beverage cart again, she stopped at the woman's row first. "Would you like anything else, ma'am? Coffee, juice?" "No," the woman said sharply. Then, glancing toward 1A without turning her head, she added, "And I don't want anything that's been on his tray, or near his hands." The flight attendant, Lena, froze for half a second. Her smile stayed in place, but her knuckles whitened slightly as she gripped the cart. She'd been in this job for 12 years. She'd seen all kinds: the drunk businessmen, the crying toddlers, the passengers who argued over reclining seats. But this quiet, cutting kind of cruelty, it always hit harder. Because it wasn't loud. It was calculated. It was meant to humiliate without leaving a mark. "Of course," Lena said evenly. "I'll bring you a fresh cup from the galley." She moved on, but not before catching the man's eye. He gave her the tiniest nod. "Thank you, I see you," and she nodded back. No words needed. They both knew what was happening. A few minutes later, the man decided to get up. His legs were stiff from sitting, and he needed to stretch. He unbuckled his seatbelt slowly, stood and stepped into the aisle. He didn't look at the woman. He just started walking toward the back of the plane where the lavatories were. But before he'd taken 3 steps, she shot up from her seat. "Excuse me," she said, voice rising just enough to draw attention. "Where do you think you're going?" He turned surprised. "To the restroom." "Well, you can't just barge through like you own the place," she snapped. "There's a line. You'll wait your turn." He looked around. The aisle was empty. No one was waiting. The nearest passenger was 2 rows back, reading a novel with headphones on. "There's no line," he said calmly. "That's not the point," she insisted, stepping into the aisle herself, blocking his path. "You don't just get to walk around first class like it's your personal hallway. Some of us paid for peace and quiet." A few nearby passengers glanced over. A man in 2A paused his movie. A woman in 1D looked down at her lap, uncomfortable. He took a slow breath. "Ma'am, I'm not causing any trouble." "I just need to use the restroom." "You're making a scene just by being here," she shot back, her voice trembling now. Not with fear, but with the kind of anger that comes from feeling your control slipping. "You think dressing up and buying a fancy ticket makes you one of us? It doesn't. We can all see right through it." The words landed like stones, cold, heavy, meant to wound, but he didn't flinch. He'd heard variations of this his whole life. In school hallways, in job interviews, in upscale restaurants where the host suddenly lost his reservation. He knew this script. And he refused to play the role she'd written for him. "I'm not trying to be one of you," he said, voice low but clear. "I'm just a man on a plane, same as you. I paid for my seat. I'm following the rules. And I'd appreciate the same respect you expect for yourself." For a moment, she looked stunned, as if no one had ever spoken to her like that. Like a human being, not a stereotype. Her mouth opened, then closed. She took a step back, but her eyes burned with something bitter. Respect has to be earned, she muttered. Actually, he said gently, it starts with basic decency. That's free. It doesn't cost a thing. Before she could reply, Lena appeared at the front of the cabin. Is everything all right here? The woman turned to her, voice suddenly sweet again. Oh yes, dear. We were just having a discussion. This gentleman seems to think the rules don't apply to him. Lena looked at the man. He gave her a small shake of his head. Don't escalate, just de-escalate. She understood. Sir, she said politely, if you'd like to use the lavatory, the one in the rear is available. I'll make sure it's ready for you. He nodded. Thank you. As he walked past the woman, she didn't move out of the way fast enough. Their shoulders nearly brushed. She flinched like he was contagious. He kept walking. In the back of the plane, the lavatory was clean and quiet. He locked the door, leaned against the sink, and let out a long breath. His hands weren't shaking, but his chest felt tight. Not from fear, from sadness, because it wasn't just about him. It was about every person who'd ever been made to feel like an intruder in their own country, in their own skin. He splashed water on his face, straightened his shirt, and looked at himself in the mirror. Same eyes, same face, same man who'd built something from nothing. He wouldn't let her words define him, but he also wouldn't let them go unanswered, not in the way she expected, but in the way that mattered. When he returned to his seat, the woman was sitting rigidly, staring straight ahead. She didn't look at him, but the air between them was charged like before a thunderstorm. Back in his seat, he pulled out his phone again. This time, he didn't just text his assistant. He opened a secure folder and tapped a few icons. A small camera icon blinked to life, connected to the aircraft's internal monitoring system. As a partial owner, he had limited access to certain operational feeds, including cabin footage during incidents. He didn't use it often, but today he needed proof. Not for revenge, for accountability. He watched a short clip on his screen. The woman muttering at the gate, refusing the drink, blocking the aisle, clear, unmistakable. He saved it, encrypted it, and sent it with a note. Log this. Initiate Protocol Delta. Protocol Delta wasn't about punishment. It was about education, policy enforcement, and protecting other passengers from the same treatment. His airline had zero tolerance for discrimination, not just in words, but in action. Up front, the woman finally opened her book, but her hands were unsteady. She kept glancing toward him, as if expecting him to do something dramatic, yell, threaten, make a scene. But he just sat quietly looking out the window, as if nothing had happened, and that unnerved her more than anything. Because when you expect someone to react with anger, and they respond with calm, it forces you to look in the mirror, and sometimes the reflection isn't pretty. A few rows back, a young man in his 20s discreetly held up his phone. He hadn't filmed the whole thing, but he'd caught the aisle confrontation. He wasn't doing it to shame anyone, he just knew this kind of thing needed witnesses. Later, he'd offer the footage to the right people if asked. Time passed. The plane hummed steadily. Lunch was served, chicken or pasta. The woman barely touched hers. The man ate slowly, thoughtfully. He wasn't hungry, but he forced himself to eat. You never let someone steal your peace and your nourishment. As the flight attendants cleared trays, Lena paused by his seat. You okay? She asked softly, pretending to adjust the blanket. I'm fine, he said, but thank you for having my back. You deserve to fly in peace, she whispered. Like everyone else, he smiled faintly. One day maybe everyone will believe that. She moved on, but the moment stayed with him. It reminded him why he loved this industry, not for the profits, but for the people like Lena, who showed up every day with grace under pressure, who treated every passenger with dignity, even when it wasn't returned. Meanwhile, the woman grew quieter. The anger seemed to drain out of her, replaced by something else, unease maybe. She kept checking her watch, fidgeting with her pearls, glancing at the cockpit door, because something had shifted. Earlier, she'd assumed he was bluffing, just another guy trying to act rich. But the way he carried himself now, the quiet authority, the lack of defensiveness, it didn't fit her story. And that scared her. She didn't know it yet, but her assumptions were about to collide with reality. Up in the cockpit, The captain made a routine call to the cabin. "Lena, could you ask the gentleman in 1A to stop by for a quick word? Standard post-inspection check." Lena's eyes widened slightly. She nodded. "Yes, Captain." She walked back to 1A. "Sir, the captain would like to see you for a moment." He stood without a word. As he passed the woman, she finally spoke, softly, almost pleading. Who are you?" He didn't stop, didn't look at her. Just said, "Someone who believes everyone deserves respect, especially when they're flying 35,000 feet above the ground." He disappeared into the cockpit. The woman sat frozen. Her heart pounded, because now she wasn't sure anymore, and uncertainty, for someone who'd spent a lifetime thinking she had all the answers, was the most terrifying feeling of all. Inside the cockpit, the co-pilot grinned. "Good to see you." "How was the hangar?" "Solid," the man replied. "New fire suppression system works like a charm." They chatted for a few minutes, technical details, crew schedules, upcoming routes. To anyone listening, it sounded like colleagues catching up, because that's exactly what they were. When he stepped back into the cabin, the entire first-class section seemed to hold its breath. The woman watched him return to his seat. Watched him sit down like nothing had happened. But everything had, because now she had a terrible sinking feeling. And the worst part? She'd brought it all on herself. The rest of the flight passed in heavy silence. No more comments. No more glares. Just the steady drone of the engines and the weight of what was coming. He didn't gloat. He didn't smirk. He just waited, because truth has a way of revealing itself, and when it did, it wouldn't be loud, it would be quiet, and it would change everything. The plane began its slow descent into Chicago, the engines softening to a low rumble as it dropped through layers of cloud. Outside, the patchwork of suburbs and highways grew clearer, roads snaking like gray threads through neighborhoods and shopping centers. Inside the cabin, passengers stirred, packing away laptops, buckling seatbelts, folding up blankets. The routine of landing had begun, but in row 1 the air felt different, thicker, charged with something unspoken. The woman in 1C hadn't said a word since the man returned from the cockpit. She sat stiffly, hands folded in her lap, eyes fixed on the seat back in front of her, but she wasn't seeing it. Her mind was racing. That brief exchange with the flight attendant, "The captain would like to see you," had lodged in her chest like a stone. Why would the captain ask for him? Unless he knew him. Unless they were more than just passenger and pilot. She stole a glance at him. He was calm, gazing out the window as the city skyline emerged in the distance. No arrogance, no showmanship, just quiet presence, and that made it worse, because arrogance she could dismiss. But this calm certainty, it didn't fit the story she'd told herself. A few rows behind, a college student named Dev had been watching the whole thing unfold. He'd seen the woman's cold stares, heard her sharp remarks, witnessed the aisle confrontation. He'd even recorded a short clip on his phone, not to post online, but because something about it felt wrong, and he wanted to be ready if someone needed proof. Now, as the plane descended, curiosity got the better of him. He pulled out his phone, opened his browser, and typed in a few words. Horizon Skies Airlines owner. He didn't know the man's name, but he remembered the airline logo on the side of the plane, blue wings over a silver horizon. Horizon Skies, a regional carrier that flew mostly Midwest routes. He scrolled through search results, news articles, press releases. Then he saw it, a photo from an aviation conference 2 years ago. There, standing beside the CEO, was the man from 1A. The caption read, "Co-founder and equity partner." Dev's eyes widened. He tapped the image to enlarge it. Same face, same calm eyes, same quiet posture. He looked around the cabin, then back at his screen. His heart started beating faster. He leaned over to the woman next to him, a retired teacher heading home to visit her daughter, and whispered, "You're not going to believe this." She raised an eyebrow. "What?" He showed her the photo. She read the caption, then looked up at the man in 1A. Her expression shifted from confusion to shock. "No," she murmured. "You're kidding." "I'm not," Dev said. "He's one of the owners." Words spread quietly like ripples in still water. Not loud, not dramatic, just a few hushed whispers, a few exchanged glances. A businessman in 3A nodded slowly, as if a puzzle piece had just clicked into place. A flight attendant passing through the cabin caught the murmurs and gave a knowing look. She'd suspected as much when the captain called for him. The woman in 1C felt it before she saw it. The shift in energy, the way people's eyes flicked toward her then away, the sudden silence around her, as if everyone was holding their breath. She turned slightly and caught Dev staring at her, not with anger but with something worse, pity. Her stomach dropped. She fumbled for her own phone, hands trembling. She typed Horizon Sky's leadership into the search bar. Within seconds, she found the official website. Under our team, there he was. Not in a suit. Not posing with a jet. Just a simple headshot, smiling slightly with a bio that read, helped launch Horizon Skies in 2011 with a mission to connect underserved communities through safe, reliable air travel. She read it twice. Then a third time. Her face grew pale. All at once the pieces crashed together. The way he'd spoken to the captain, the calm authority. The fact that he hadn't argued or shouted because he didn't need to. He wasn't trying to prove he belonged. He already owned part of the sky they were flying through. The shame hit her like a wave. Hot, suffocating, inescapable. She thought about everything she'd said. The muttered insults, the refusal of the drink, the way she'd blocked him in the aisle like he was a threat. She'd treated him like a fraud, a trespasser, when in truth he was one of the people who made this flight possible. And not just this flight. Hundreds like it every week, carrying nurses to night shifts, students to colleges, grandparents to see newborns. She turned to him, desperate now. I didn't know, she stammered, voice barely above a whisper. He looked at her. Not with anger. Not with triumph. Just with quiet sadness. That doesn't make it okay, he said gently. Not knowing is why we have to be careful. Because assumptions hurt people. She opened her mouth to apologize, but he held up a hand. Not to silence her, but to stop the performance. Not now, he said. We'll handle this properly on the ground. The words weren't harsh, but they carried weight. They meant this wasn't over, and it wouldn't be swept under the rug. The plane touched down smoothly on runway 27L. The wheels kissed the tarmac with a soft thud, and the reverse thrusters roared as the aircraft slowed. Outside, ground crew waved from the tarmac. Inside, passengers began gathering their belongings, the tension of the flight giving way to the usual post-landing shuffle. But row 1 stayed still. As the seatbelt sign dinged off, the man stood and retrieved his backpack. He didn't look at the woman. He walked calmly toward the front of the cabin. Before he even reached the exit, 2 airline security officers in dark uniforms were waiting just inside the jet bridge. They nodded respectfully as he approached. Sir, one said quietly, we've been briefed. Car's ready, he nodded. Thank you. Behind him, the woman watched, frozen in her seat. She wanted to call out, to beg for forgiveness, but the words stuck in her throat. What could she possibly say that would undo what she'd done? Passengers filed past her, some avoiding her gaze, others giving her looks that said everything without saying a word. She felt exposed, not because she'd been caught, but because she'd been seen. Truly seen. And what they saw was someone who'd let prejudice override basic humanity. Outside, the man stepped onto the jet bridge. The Chicago air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of rain. A black sedan with tinted windows idled near the gate. His assistant, a woman in her 30s with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense ponytail, stood by the door holding a tablet. You okay? She asked as he approached. I'm fine, he said. Just tired of the same old story. She handed him the tablet. On the screen was a timeline of the incident. Timestamps, witness statements, the cabin footage he'd requested. We've got everything, she said. Legal's reviewing it now. They want to know how you'd like to proceed. He thought for a moment. He could press charges, demand a public apology, ban her from flying with the airline for life. All of it would be justified, but none of it would change what really mattered, the mindset that made her act that way in the first place. Let's do it right, he said. Not for revenge. For repair, she nodded. Protocol Delta it is. Back inside the terminal, the woman finally stood. Her legs felt weak. She gathered her things slowly, as if moving through water. When she stepped off the plane, she expected to be stopped, questioned, maybe even escorted away. But no one approached her. The flight attendants were busy with post-flight duties. Passengers streamed toward baggage claim. She was just another traveler. But the silence was louder than any accusation. At the gate podium, Lena, the flight attendant, was filling out her log. She looked up as the woman passed. Their eyes met. Lena didn't smile, didn't frown, just gave a small, solemn nod. It wasn't judgment. It was disappointment. And that hurt more than anger ever could. The woman walked toward the terminal, her designer bag suddenly feeling heavy. She passed a digital screen showing Horizon Sky's mission statement, flying with dignity for everyone. She stopped and stared at it. The words blurred as tears welled in her eyes. She hadn't cried in years. Not since her husband passed. But now, standing in the middle of a busy airport surrounded by strangers, she felt the weight of her own smallness. She'd spent her life believing she was better than others, more refined, more deserving. But today, she'd been shown the truth, that real dignity isn't about your seat assignment or your bank account. It's about how you treat people when no one's watching, and she'd failed. Meanwhile, in a quiet conference room near the airline's Chicago office, the man sat across from his legal team. They laid out the options. "We can file a formal complaint with the Department of Transportation," said the lead counsel. "Discriminatory conduct on a flight is a federal matter. She could face fines, even a ban from flying." He listened carefully. Then he asked, "What if we gave her a chance to learn instead of just punish?" There was a pause. Then the lawyer nodded slowly. "We could require anti-bias training as part of a resolution. Partner with a local nonprofit. Make it restorative, not just punitive. That's what I want," he said. "And let's donate in her name $10,000 to the Urban Youth Aviation Program. Maybe her money can help kids who look like me see themselves in this industry." The team exchanged glances. It wasn't the usual path, but it was the right one. Back at the airport, the woman sat alone on a bench near baggage claim. She pulled out her phone again, not to search this time, but to call her daughter. When the call connected, she broke down. "I did something terrible today," she whispered. "I judged someone just because of how they looked. And I was so wrong." Her daughter listened quietly. Then she said, "Mom, it's not too late to make it right." The woman wiped her eyes. "How?" "Start by listening. Then learn. Then do better." Those words stayed with her as she collected her suitcase and walked toward the taxi stand. The sun had broken through the clouds, casting golden light across the terminal roof. For the first time in years, she didn't feel superior. She felt human, flawed, capable of change. And maybe, just maybe, that was the beginning of something new. As for the man, he didn't go home right away. He visited the airline's operations center, checked in with the crew, thanked Lena personally for her professionalism. Then he stood for a long time in front of the departure board, watching flights come and go, each one carrying people with stories, struggles, hopes. He thought about the woman. He didn't hate her. He pitied the fear that made her lash out. And he hoped, really hoped, that this moment would wake her up, not break her down. Because the sky belongs to everyone, and maybe, just maybe, today's flight would help someone remember that. The days after the flight moved with a strange kind of quiet urgency. At Horizon Sky's headquarters, things weren't loud or dramatic. No press conferences, no angry statements. But behind the scenes, wheels were turning. People were talking. Documents were being signed. Decisions were being made not out of anger, but out of a deep, steady belief that how you respond to harm matters just as much as the harm itself. The woman didn't hear from the airline right away. For 2 days she waited, jumping every time her phone buzzed. She'd gone home to her quiet suburban house, the kind with neatly trimmed hedges and a porch swing that never moved. She tried to go about her routine, watering the plants, sorting mail, watching the evening news. But her mind kept circling back to the plane, to the way he'd looked at her. Not with rage, but with disappointment, like she'd failed a test she didn't even know she was taking. On the third morning, a plain envelope arrived in her mailbox. No logo, no return address, just her name and address typed neatly on the front. Her hands shook as she opened it. Inside was a letter on official airline letterhead. It wasn't accusatory. It wasn't threatening. It simply laid out what had happened. Time-stamped incidents, quotes from crew and passengers, a note that video footage existed and had been reviewed. Then came the offer. Because Horizon Skies believed in accountability that leads to growth, not just punishment, they proposed a resolution. If she agreed, she would complete a certified anti-bias and cultural competency training program. 8 hours in person, with a respected local organization. She would also write a letter of acknowledgement, not necessarily public unless she chose, reflecting on her actions. In return, the airline would not pursue legal action or file a formal complaint with federal authorities. Additionally, they had already made a $10,000 donation in her name to a youth aviation program that mentors students from underrepresented communities. At the bottom, in neat print, it read, "This is not about shame. It's about change. We hope you'll accept this path forward." She read it 3 times. The first time she felt defensive. The second confused. The third, something shifted. Because for the first time, no one was calling her a monster. They were giving her a chance to be better. She called the number at the bottom of the page. A calm voice answered. Someone from the airline's community relations team. They didn't lecture her. They just listened, asked how she was feeling, explained the training program in detail. It wasn't about guilt, but about understanding how bias works, even in people who think they're good. It covered history, psychology, real stories from people who'd faced discrimination in everyday spaces, airports, stores, hospitals. "Why are you doing this?" she asked quietly. "Why not just ban me or sue me?" There was a pause. Then the voice said, "Because we believe people can change, and if we only punish, we miss the chance to heal." She signed up that afternoon. Meanwhile, the man who'd been on the plane was back at work. He didn't talk about the incident much. When colleagues asked, he'd say, "It's being handled," and leave it at that. But he did one important thing. He called a meeting with the airline's leadership team, not to assign blame, but to ask a question. "How many times has this happened before?" he said. "And we just let it slide because it was one passenger or not a big deal?" The room fell silent. The truth was, it had happened before. Not always as blatant, but in subtle ways. A flight attendant ignored. A passenger questioned about their ticket. A comment disguised as a joke. They dealt with it case by case, but never addressed the system that allowed it to keep happening. So they made changes. First, they updated the customer conduct policy. Discriminatory behavior, whether based on race, religion, gender, or any protected characteristic, would now be treated as a serious violation, on par with threatening behavior or intoxication. Second, they partnered with a national diversity training institute to roll out mandatory workshops for all frontline staff. Not just how to report incidents, but how to de-escalate them with dignity and tact. Third, they created a confidential reporting channel for passengers who experienced bias, with a promise of follow-up within 48 hours. The man insisted on one more thing, that the training include real stories, not just theory. So they invited crew members to share their own experiences. The time a passenger refused to sit next to them, the comment about their accent, the assumption they were just cleaning when they were actually the pilot. It wasn't about making people feel guilty. It was about building empathy. Back in the suburbs, the woman attended her first training session on a rainy Saturday morning. She walked into a community center nervous, expecting judgment. Instead, she was greeted by a facilitator who said, "Welcome. We're all here to learn." The room held about 20 people, teachers, nurses, small business owners, even a retired police officer. Some were there by court order. Others, like her, by choice. They started with a simple question. When was the first time you realized race mattered in America? She listened as people shared stories of being followed in stores, of having their names mispronounced on purpose, of being told they speak so well, like it was a surprise. She heard about the exhaustion of constantly proving you belong, and for the first time she didn't argue. She just listened. During a break, she approached the facilitator. "I thought I wasn't racist," she admitted. "I have black friends. I voted for Obama, but I still did what I did." The facilitator nodded. Racism isn't just about hate. Sometimes it's about assumptions we don't even know we carry. The work isn't about being perfect. It's about being willing to see yourself clearly. Those words stayed with her. Over the next few weeks, she did the work. She read books she'd never considered before. She watched documentaries. She even reached out to an old coworker, a black woman she'd always been polite to but never truly seen, and asked humbly if she'd be willing to talk. To her surprise, the woman agreed. They met for coffee. And for 2 hours, the woman listened. Really listened? Not to defend herself, but to understand. Back at Horizon Skies, the man received a copy of the woman's reflection letter. She hadn't made excuses. She wrote about her upbringing, the unspoken messages she'd absorbed, the fear of losing status that made her lash out at someone she saw as an intruder. She admitted she'd used politeness as a shield to avoid real accountability. And she thanked the airline, not for going easy on her, but for giving her a mirror instead of a hammer. He read it twice. Then he filed it away, not as proof of her shame, but as evidence of her courage. The media eventually caught wind of the story. A local reporter heard rumors and called the airline for comment. The man approved a short statement. Horizon Skies is committed to safe, respectful travel for all. When incidents occur, we respond with both accountability and opportunity for growth. That's how we build a better industry. No names were mentioned, no sensational headlines, just a quiet stand for decency. But the story spread anyway, on social media, in community groups, in classrooms. Not as a gotcha moment, but as an example of what's possible when people choose repair over revenge. One evening, the woman sat at her kitchen table, staring at a blank sheet of paper. She decided to make her letter public, not for praise, but as a warning to others like her. Don't wait until you're caught to examine your heart. She wrote carefully, honestly. She didn't ask for forgiveness. She just told the truth. When she finished, she emailed it to the airline with a note. If you think it might help someone else, please share it. They did. Not on their main page, but in a blog post titled When We Get It Wrong and What Comes After. It got thousands of shares. Comments poured in, not all kind, but many grateful. This took guts, one read. I've done similar things. Thank you for showing us it's never too late. The man read those comments late one night after putting his kids to bed. He felt a quiet sense of peace. Not because he'd won, but because something broken had started to heal. And that, he thought, was the real victory. Because change doesn't always come with sirens and headlines. Sometimes it starts with a letter, a training session, a cup of coffee between two people who finally see each other. And sometimes it starts with a flight, where one person's cruelty becomes another's chance to show the world what true strength looks like. Not in shouting, but in offering a hand up, even to the one who tried to push you down. The woman finished her training. She received a certificate. She framed it not as a trophy, but as a reminder. And the man? He kept flying, not in first class to prove a point, but in whatever seat was available, just like everyone else. Because the sky, after all, belongs to us all. And dignity? That's free. You just have to choose to give it and receive it every single day. 6 weeks after the flight, the air in Chicago carried the first crisp hint of autumn. Cool in the mornings, golden in the afternoons, the kind of weather that makes you want to slow down and notice things. In a small community center on the city's south side, a group of teenagers sat in a circle, laughing over blueprints of model airplanes. They were part of a new aviation mentorship program, one that had just received a surprise donation large enough to buy flight simulators, textbooks, and even fund 2 summer internships at a real airline. The woman walked in quietly, holding a tray of cookies she'd baked that morning. She wasn't here as a guest. She was here as a volunteer. After finishing her training, she'd asked the program director if there was any way she could help. Not to make up for what she'd done. She knew that wasn't how it worked, but to build something new. At first, the teens eyed her with polite skepticism. She was older, white, dressed in a sweater set that screamed suburb. But she didn't try to be cool or pretend she knew about aviation. She just showed up. Every Tuesday, she helped organize tools, made coffee for the instructors, and listened, really listened, when the students talked about their dreams of becoming pilots, engineers, or air traffic controllers. One afternoon, a quiet girl named Tasha asked her, "Why do you keep coming back?" She didn't give a polished answer. She just said, "Because I spent most of my life thinking I had all the answers. Then I realized I hadn't even been asking the right questions. Being here, it helps me learn." Tasha nodded slowly. "Okay, just don't treat us like we're surprises. Like, oh, you're smart for a black girl. We're just smart." The woman felt the words like a gentle punch to the chest. "I won't," she said. "I promise." And she didn't. Meanwhile, at Horizon Skies headquarters, the man sat in a conference room filled with flight attendants, pilots, gate agents, and customer service reps. They weren't there for a performance review or a policy lecture. They were there to shape the future. On the table were drafts of a new passenger respect pledge, a simple one-page document that would soon be included in every booking confirmation and posted in every gate area. It didn't use legal jargon. It just said, "We fly together." That means treating everyone with basic kindness, no matter what they look like, where they're from, or how much they paid for their ticket. If you can't do that, we ask that you choose another airline. It was bold. Some executives worried it might scare off customers, but the man stood firm. "We'd rather have fewer passengers who respect each other than more who don't," he said. "Our planes carry people, not just bodies." The team also rolled out a new crew training module called Dignity in the Air. It included role-playing scenarios, real passenger stories with permission, and guidance on how to support someone who's been targeted without making them the center of attention. One key rule: never ask the victim to just let it go. Instead, say, "I've got your back." Flight attendants loved it. For years, they'd been told to stay neutral in conflicts even when someone was being cruel. Now they had tools and permission to act. One of them, Lena, the same one from Flight 227, stood up during the session. "This matters," she said, voice steady, "because when you're up there at 35,000 feet and someone makes another passenger feel small, it doesn't just hurt that person. It poisons the whole cabin. We're not just serving drinks. We're holding space for humanity." The room fell silent. Then someone started clapping. Soon everyone was. Later that week, the man received a handwritten letter in the mail. No return address, just a postmark from a nearby suburb. Inside was a single sheet of paper, the handwriting neat but slightly shaky. "I don't expect you to reply. I'm not writing to ask for anything. I just wanted you to know that I've been going to the youth aviation program every week. I've met kids who remind me of my own grandchildren, bright, curious, full of questions, and I keep thinking, what if someone had treated them the way I treated you? Would they still believe they belong in the sky? I can't undo what I did, but I can spend the rest of my life making sure no one else feels that way on a plane or anywhere else. Thank you for not giving up on people like me. A woman still learning." He read it 3 times. Then he folded it carefully and put it in his desk drawer, the same one where he kept letters from passengers who'd thanked his airline for getting them to a wedding, a funeral, a new job. This one didn't feel different. It just felt honest. He didn't write back, not because he was cold, but because some things don't need a reply. Sometimes the best response is to keep building a world where that letter never has to be written in the first place. One Saturday morning, he took his own kids to the airport, not to work, but to watch planes take off. They stood behind the chain-link fence near the runway, bundled in jackets, sipping hot chocolate from paper cups. His youngest pointed to a Horizon Skies jet as it lifted into the sky, its blue wings catching the sun. "Is that one of ours?" the child asked. He smiled. "Yeah, that's one of ours." As they watched, a young black boy, maybe 10 years old, walked up with his mother, clutching a toy airplane. He stood a few feet away, eyes wide with wonder. When the next Horizon Skies flight taxied toward the runway, the boy whispered, "Someday that'll be me." His mother squeezed his shoulder. "It will." The man caught the boy's eye and gave a small, quiet nod. Not a promise, just an acknowledgement. "I see you. You belong here too." The boy nodded back, a little straighter, a little prouder. Later that day, the man boarded another flight, this time to Detroit for a safety audit. He wore a suit, not because he had to, but because he liked dressing well when representing the company. As he walked down the jet bridge, the crew greeted him by name, not because of his title, but because he always asked how their families were, remembered their kids' names, thanked them for their work. He settled into his seat, economy this time since first class was full. A few rows back, a young man in a Horizon Skies internship t-shirt glanced up, did a double take, then grinned. The man gave him a wink. The kid beamed like he'd just seen his hero. And maybe he had, because leadership isn't always about corner offices or press releases. Sometimes it's about showing up with humility, about turning pain into purpose, about proving that the highest form of power isn't control, it's compassion with boundaries. Back in the community center, the woman helped Tasha adjust the wing flaps on her model plane. "You know," Tasha said casually, "my mom says flying is freedom." "It is," the woman replied, "but only if everyone gets to fly." Tasha really looked at her for the first time. Yeah, she said. I guess that's true. Outside, the sun dipped low, painting the sky in streaks of orange and pink. Somewhere above, a Horizon Skies plane cut through the clouds, carrying nurses, students, grandparents, dreamers, all of them for a few hours, equal in the sky. And down below, in quiet acts of repair and resolve, people were learning that dignity isn't something you earn by your seat assignment. It's something you give and receive, simply because you're human. The woman packed up her things, said goodbye to the students, and walked to her car. She didn't feel proud, but she felt hopeful. And sometimes that's enough to start again. As for the man, he leaned his head against the window as the Detroit flight climbed into the evening sky. He closed his eyes not to sleep but to remember the hangar his grandfather swept clean, the first plane he helped buy with borrowed money, the faces of the crew who trusted him to do right by them. He hadn't changed the world in one day, but he'd changed one flight, one policy, one heart, and that, he knew, was how real change begins. Not with a bang, but with a choice. The choice to see people. The choice to act with courage. The choice to believe that even the deepest wounds can heal, if we're willing to do the work. The plane hummed steadily, carrying him forward into a future where maybe, just maybe, no one would ever have to prove they belong in the sky again.